The snow had turned to slush 2 days ago, but the wind still bit like it carried knives in its teeth. Mud clung to her skirts, weighted them, so they dragged as she walked each step slower than the last. Her boots had split along the seams. The cold was inside them now. Inside her too. Her fingers had gone stiff an hour back, but she kept the baby close to her chest, tucked into the shawl that used to be her mother's. The child made no sound. None of them did not anymore. She looked behind her. The 6 little ones trailed like ghosts through the roadside muck, too tired to cry. Alma, the oldest, carried the smallest girl on her hip and did not meet her mother's eyes. None of them asked where they were going. That had stopped somewhere past the last town, if you could call it that. 2 boarded-up storefronts and a saloon with a broken window. They'd been told there was work there. There wasn't. Just another man behind a desk who said it plain, too many mouths. Try the mission in Abilene. Abilene was 50 miles behind them now. The wagon had given out on the second day. A wheel cracked clean through on a rut of frozen ground, and the man driving it, some cousin of her dead husband's, had taken the mule and gone. Didn't say goodbye. Just spat into the dirt and walked off like she was already buried. Her legs gave out 5 miles later. The children didn't speak when she fell. They just waited. Alma pulled the baby from her arms and stood there holding her like a shield. She'd cried then in the dark. Not from pain, not even from hunger, but because no one had come. No one ever came. This morning she'd woken under a tree with frost in her hair. The river was close, she could hear it. That meant a ranch, maybe. Water meant cattle, and cattle meant people. She'd walked toward the sound, clutching the baby, leaving muddy footprints through the grass. Her limbs were hollow, her breath short and dry, but she kept moving. Because the baby was breathing. Because Alma still believed in her. And then she saw it. Not a town. Not a road. Just a fence line, stretching east and west, disappearing into the folds of land like thread through fabric. Beyond it, a single house. Weather-beaten, sun-bleached, leaning a little to one side, but standing. A barn behind it. Smoke from the chimney. And horses. At least 3 of them grazing near a low rise. She stopped there at the edge of the property, mud soaking into her stockings, one foot twisted from where she'd stepped wrong. Her arms were shaking. The gate was chained shut. It was a small thing, a loop of iron and a simple lock, but it might as well have been a wall 10 feet high. She had nothing to offer. No coin. No pride. Just 6 children and an ache in her bones that would not leave. She didn't notice the man until he was nearly upon her. He came from the barn side, walking slow, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing most of his face. One hand rested on the butt of a hammer tucked into his belt. Not threatening just there. She straightened, tried to square her shoulders. But the baby shifted and she nearly lost her grip. The man stopped a few paces from the gate. His eyes were dark. Not unkind. Just unreadable. "Ma'am," he said. She swallowed. We need some water," she said. Her voice cracked halfway through. "I'll work for it." A long pause. "Then this your land?" She blinked at the question, thrown off. "No. We just—" He nodded once, slow. "Then you ain't got to ask to leave it." Her chest tightened. Shame, rage, grief, all of it twisted together until she couldn't breathe. "I ain't asking to stay," she said louder now. "I'm asking not to let my babies die on your damn road." Something flickered in his face. His gaze shifted, and she knew the moment he counted them. 6. All quiet. All watching. He looked back at her. She didn't drop her eyes. "I got chores," he said finally. "If they're quiet, they can stay by the barn." "I'll work," she repeated. "I said chores," he muttered, already turning. "Didn't say who'd be doing 'em." He walked to the gate and undid the chain. It was a small sound, that metal falling away, but it echoed through her chest like thunder. The barn smelled of hay and old iron, and it was warmer than the wind outside. Not warm enough to thaw her hands, but it dulled the ache in her joints. She set the baby down on a folded horse blanket, checking twice to be sure the little one was breathing steady, then looked to Alma. The girl's face was unreadable, chin tucked down, her jaw tight. "Keep them here," she told her, glancing at the other children. "Quiet. Don't move if you don't have to." Alma nodded once, and that was enough. The man didn't speak again until she stepped out into the yard, the wind slicing through her dress. He was pulling a tarp over a stack of firewood, his movements deliberate and slow, as if the weather didn't touch him at all. "You got names?" he asked, without looking at her. She hesitated. "I'm Miriam," she said. "The oldest is Alma. Then there's Ruth, Caleb, Jonah, the twins Lida and Luke, and the baby's Hope." He gave a nod like he'd already stopped listening. "I'm Eli." She didn't respond. The name felt too plain for the sharpness in his eyes, too simple for a man who had let her children into his yard but not his house. He handed her a rusted bucket and pointed toward the pump behind the barn. "Water the troughs. You'll have to prime it first." "She sticks." She took it without a word. The wind caught her skirt again as she moved, and the cold bit deep, but her legs held. The pump was half buried in the weeds, the ground around it frozen and cracked. Her fingers bled before the water came. She didn't feel it much, just saw the red on the handle like rust. The water was clean, though, and cold as anything. She filled the troughs. The horses watched her, but didn't spook. One nuzzled her shoulder as she passed, and she felt the warmth of its breath through the fabric. When she came back, Eli was mending a fence rail with a coil of baling wire and a hammer. He didn't look up. "What else?" she asked. He nodded toward the hen house. "Eggs." She walked the coop, slow, careful. The hens were thin and half wild, but they didn't peck at her. She found 4 eggs in the straw and brought them back in her apron, her hands shaking from the cold. She didn't ask if they were for her. "You done for now," Eli said, not unkindly. "They eat." She hesitated, then nodded. "A little. Alma saved them some bread." He grunted. "You eat." Miriam didn't answer. She looked at her hands instead, the skin raw, the nails cracked down to nothing. He stood up and rubbed his palms together, eyes scanning the horizon like he'd lost something in the trees. "I'll heat water," he said finally. "Wash the little ones. That baby's got a cough." It wasn't a question. Inside the house, everything was rough-hewn and spare. Floorboards uneven. A stove with a warped door. 1 table, 2 chairs. No pictures. Just a Bible on the shelf and a clean floor. He didn't say anything when she brought the children in, just set a basin by the fire and left them alone. Later, when the girls were warm and wrapped in old flannel and the boys sat eating slices of dry cornbread, Miriam stood near the fire and watched the snow start up again through the glass. "Where's your wife?" she asked, not turning to look at him. Eli was sharpening a blade at the table. He stopped, wiped the edge clean. "Buried on the ridge," he said. Silence stretched between them. "I didn't come here to stay," Miriam said finally. He gave a short laugh. "Not cruel. Just tired. Didn't think you did." She turned then, and for the first time met his eyes in the firelight. They were darker than before. Not harsh, just deep, like a well that never dried up. "Why'd you let us in?" Eli stared at the blade for a long moment. "Couldn't leave a woman to freeze with 7 mouths at her back," he said. "It's 6, she corrected softly. 7 with me." He didn't answer. The fire popped. From the next room, Hope coughed a soft rattle that cracked something in Miriam's chest. She wrapped her arms around herself and turned back to the window. Outside, the snow fell steady and slow, covering the road behind them. If this story rode with you, subscribe and continue. The days folded into each other like worn pages, one nearly the same as the last. Morning brought the wind always, and Eli's quiet voice at the door with a task or two waiting. Miriam never asked twice. She rose before the children, washed her face with cold water, tied back her hair, and worked until her fingers ached. She fed the hens, hauled water, stacked wood until her shoulders went numb. The ground was still frozen solid, but she learned the rhythm of it, where her boots would catch where the barn roof leaked, how to pitch hay so it didn't fall back into her face. The children stayed mostly inside. Eli had brought out blankets and patched coats from an old trunk. The smell of cedar clung to them. Alma helped with the little ones, while Miriam worked quiet and dutiful. Sometimes she caught the girl staring out the window, her jaw clenched, her eyes older than they should have been. Miriam knew that look. She wore it herself at 15. Eli didn't speak more than he needed to, but he watched. She could feel it when she worked near the fence, or when she moved toward the house with the eggs in her apron. At first it made her stomach twist, but she realized something after a few days. It wasn't suspicion. It was habit. He watched the way a man watches the land, always alert for signs of change, of threat, of storm. One morning, a week after the snow came back, she found him tending to a fence post that had split near the creek. He was driving a new stake into the ground, shoulders moving slow and sure. "I can do that," she said, approaching with a coil of wire under her arm. He paused mid-swing, looked at her. His breath showed in the cold air. "Didn't think you'd want to." "I don't, but I will." A corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile. He stepped aside and handed her the hammer. The handle was worn smooth, the wood warm from his hands. She swung hard, missed the post, then squared her feet and tried again. The next strike landed. Not perfect, but enough. Eli nodded once and moved to hold the wire in place. They worked like that for an hour in silence. The rhythm of labor filled the space where words might gone. When the last staple was driven in, he leaned on the fence and looked out over the field. "You ever live on land?" he asked. "No." "You're strong for someone who hasn't." Miriam didn't answer right away. The wind picked up and she tucked her hands into her coat sleeves. "Wasn't strength," she said. "It was necessity." He nodded like he understood that. Back at the house, the stove was warm and the smell of stew, thin but enough, hung in the air. Eli handed her the ladle without speaking. She dished out bowls for the children while he cleaned mud off his boots at the threshold. That night, as the wind howled against the windows, he spoke again. "Your man. He died recently." Miriam didn't look up. She was mending a sock with a bone needle by the fire. "Year ago. Drowned in a cattle runoff crossing north of Weatherford." Eli grunted. "That was a bad spring. Worse summer." He didn't ask more. But the next morning when she rose, there was a new pair of boots on the stoop. Not new exactly, worn, cracked at the toes, but lined in sheepskin. Her size, or close enough. No note. No explanation. She put them on without a word. Days passed. Then 2 weeks. One afternoon she caught Eli standing near the barn holding Lida in his arms. The little girl's hair was tangled, her nose running, but she was laughing, really laughing, and Eli stood like a man who didn't know what to do with the sound of joy. Later that night, as the fire crackled low and hope slept curled into Miriam's side, she spoke without lifting her head. "They said I had too many children to be helped," she said. Eli was seated by the window, whittling a piece of wood down to a smooth curve. "Who did? Church. Mission house. Sheriff's clerk in Abilene. Said I should leave the oldest with a farmer, take the youngest to the charity rail and start over." Eli's knife stopped moving. "And you didn't too?" "No," she said softly. "I never begged to be saved. Just didn't want them to starve." The wood in his hands cracked. He didn't speak again, but in the morning there were 2 more plates on the table, and a pile of seed catalogs on the windowsill, dog-eared and waiting. The thaw came slow that year. Snow didn't vanish so much as retreat, leaving behind a slick crust of mud and frozen roots. Trees stayed bare as if they didn't yet trust the light. But something in the air had changed. Miriam could feel it in the way the horses kicked at their stalls and the shift of birdsong before dawn. She stood at the edge of the pasture, one hand resting on the fence rail, watching the sky go pale. Hope was bundled against her chest, heavier now, skin no longer paper thin. She'd started to make noises again, soft, wet sounds like bubbles underwater. The others still slept inside, even Alma. A shovel scraped behind her. Eli was up early, digging out the half-frozen edge of the garden bed that had gone to seed years ago. The soil steamed where the sun hit it, black and rich beneath the frost. "You're starting now?" she asked, turning toward him. "Best to," he said, not stopping. "You break the ground early, you get a head start on root crops. Potatoes, onions, beans, if we're lucky." She nodded. "You want help?" He shrugged like it made no difference, but she saw the second shovel already standing in the dirt, its blade sunk halfway in. She took it without asking. By mid-morning her arms ached and her dress was soaked through with sweat and thaw, but she didn't stop. They worked in tandem, quiet, steady, familiar, not like a man and a guest, but like 2 people who had long since given up on unnecessary talk. After Eli brought out bread and a jar of canned peaches cracked open with a twist of a knife, they sat on the back steps, elbows nearly touching. "You ever think of leaving?" she asked. He chewed slowly, swallowed. "Every winter." She smiled. "Then why stay?" He stared out across the yard toward the ridge where bare trees framed the horizon. "My father built the first barn here in 1852, he said. Tore it down with my brothers and built the second in 71. I buried 2 brothers out here. My wife. I ain't much good at anything else." "You're good at quiet," she said. He looked at her, brow raised. "Most people fill silence with noise. You don't. It's a kindness." Eli turned the jar of peaches in his hand. His fingers were thick, calloused. He wiped them on his trousers. "My wife," he said slowly, "used to say the same thing. Only she meant it as a complaint." Miriam didn't laugh, but her mouth twitched. That night, Alma sat beside her on the floor, helping shell beans from a sack Eli had found in the cellar. "He's not mean," the girl said quietly. "No," Miriam replied, "but he's sad." Miriam nodded, then ran her thumb along a dry bean, pressing it free of its pod. "That kind of sadness doesn't go away. It just settles. Like dust." "Will it settle on us?" The question stopped her hand. She looked over. Alma's face was open, searching. "Only if we let it," she said. They worked until the bowl was full. 2 days later a rider came. It was early afternoon. The sky had gone pale and high clouds like old wool stretched thin. Miriam was hanging laundry, hands red from wringing, when the hoofbeats came down the ridge. The man was lean, with slicked back hair and a long brown coat too fine for this kind of place. He didn't dismount. Just sat there, reins loose in one hand, eyes scanning the yard like he was counting what belonged to him. Eli stepped out of the barn, hammer still in hand. The man smiled. "Well, hell, Eli. Thought this was still your place. Saw smoke and figured you'd sold it off." Eli didn't answer. The man tipped his hat toward Miriam. "Ma'am." She stepped closer to the line, hands clenched around a damp sheet. "Why are you here?" Eli asked flatly. "Just passing through. Heard tell there was a woman here with a pile of children. Thought maybe she'd wandered off with something that belonged to my cousin." Miriam stiffened. Eli didn't move. The man's smile stayed pinned in place. My cousin was James Waller. Died last spring. You might known him, ma'am. Miriam met his eyes. He was my husband. Her stomach turned. She hadn't seen that wagon in weeks. I can't help you, she said. You best leave. The man looked down at him. Laughed. I'll be back with the law. You do that? The rider tugged the reins and turned, kicking his horse hard. Dirt flew. In a moment he was gone back up the ridge. Miriam stood there, heart thudding, blood roaring in her ears. Eli didn't look at her. Just picked up a hammer and turned toward the barn. I've got fence to mend, he said. The wind picked up again that night, howling low and long like something lost. The kind of sound that made babies stir in their sleep and old men check their doors twice. Miriam sat up late by the stove, hands wrapped around a chipped mug, staring into the coals as if the fire might answer questions she couldn't name. The children slept close together on the bedrolls Ellie had made space for in the front room. Hope curled tight against Alma's chest. Lyda's thumb was in her mouth again, a habit Miriam thought she'd kicked months ago. She didn't wake them. Couldn't bear to. Eli came in around midnight, boots, muddy coat, stiff with cold. He didn't speak, just peeled off his outer layers, hung them by the door, and poured water into a basin to scrub his hands. You think he'll come back? Miriam asked without turning. Eli didn't answer right away. She heard the splash of water, the scrape of a tin cup against wood. Yes, he said finally. She let the word settle between them like ash. Will he bring the law? Maybe. She took a long breath. Let it out slow. I ain't afraid of him. I've had worse come knocking. Eli sat across from her, the fire casting deep lines across his face. He looked tired but steady. Unmoved like the ridge itself. You ever think about leaving? He asked. Miriam blinked at him. We've been over this. I don't mean the trail. I mean here. This place. Her mouth went dry. You want me to go? No, he said quietly. But I don't want this place to become a battlefield neither. Not for you. Not for them. They'd have nowhere to go. There's always somewhere. No, she said. Not for folks like us. There's only where we make it. The room went still. Outside the wind beat against the windows, but the house stood firm. The fire crackled once, sending up a tiny spark that flared and vanished. You know, Eli said, voice barely above a whisper, I used to think that too. That there was no place left for people who'd already been forgotten. He looked toward the sleeping children. But maybe that ain't true. The next morning Miriam woke before the sun. Eli was already outside digging something near the edge of the field. She joined him in silence, carrying 2 mugs of weak coffee. He took one without a word. What is it? She asked. He nodded toward the ground. Fence post. But deeper this time. Stronger. She watched the steam rise from her cup. He spoke again, quieter now. I can't change what's coming, but I can make sure he doesn't take what's not his. You mean the land? Eli looked at her. No, I mean you. The wind moved through the grass behind them, soft now like a whisper. She stared at the hole in the ground, the dark earth piled around it like a wound that could be healed. Later that day he hitched the wagon he hadn't used in months and rode into town. Miriam stayed behind, tending the garden rows and watching the ridge. When he returned, the sun was setting and a thin layer of dust coated his coat. He didn't say much, just handed her a folded paper, an affidavit signed by the county clerk. Her name was on it. So if he brings the law, he said simply, we show them this. She stared at it, heart thudding. I didn't ask for this. I know. I don't have anything to give you. Eli looked at her a long time. You already gave it, he said. You stayed. That night, after the children had gone quiet, she stood by the door and looked out across the land. The stars were sharp above the barn. The garden rose sat clean and waiting. And just beyond the house, old and scarred, stood with its chimney breathing steady into the sky. A place. Maybe not much, but theirs. The rider didn't return for 2 weeks. When he did, it was with a deputy and a paper flapping in the cold wind, smug as the grin on his face. The deputy stayed, mounted, eyes narrowed under his hat, scanning the yard like he expected it to turn on him. Miriam stood in the doorway with hope in her arms. The other children clustered behind her, silent, waiting. Eli didn't say a word. He stepped out slow, calm, the way he always moved, like a man with nothing left to prove. The cousin Harlan, his name was, swung off his horse with a flourish and held out the paper like it might burn someone. "Eviction notice," he said. "Filed legal. Says you've got strangers squatting here, Eli. Folks who don't belong. You wanna open your land to anyone with a sob story, that's your call. But it ain't gonna be easy once the law gets involved." Miriam didn't flinch. She stepped forward, chin high. Eli didn't look at her. He looked at the deputy. "This land was signed over to me by my father in 1879. Recorded and witnessed. I've paid my taxes. Never once missed a year." The deputy nodded. "That's true. But the claim here is about the family you're harboring. Says they abandoned rightful property belonging to the deceased. Took a wagon, a mule, and left a debt unpaid." Ellie reached into his coat and pulled out the paper he'd ridden to town for. Quietly, deliberately, he handed it over. "Legal guardianship," he said. "Voluntary. Notarized. She's here under my protection." The deputy unfolded it. "Read." His jaw moved once, then stilled. He handed the paper back. "Looks clean to me." Harlan stepped forward, face blotchy with anger. "She's a tramp with mouths she can't feed. What's she got that's worth protecting?" Eli moved, then quick but without violence. He stepped between Miriam and the man, his body square and unmoving. The kind of quiet that makes people take a step back without knowing why. "She's got dignity," he said. "Something you wouldn't know if it hit you in the face." Harlan opened his mouth, closed it again. Eli leaned in. "You come back here again stirring trouble, I'll take it to the circuit judge myself. And I'll bring every family you ever tried to short on inheritance or cattle. You think you've made enemies before." The deputy cleared his throat. "That's enough, boys." Harlan hesitated, then spit into the dirt. "You'll regret this," he muttered, then turned and mounted. They rode off without another word. Miriam stood still for a long time after the dust settled. Hope was asleep in her arms. The others hadn't moved. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. Eli finally looked at her. "Didn't do it for you," he said. "Did it because right's right." But she saw the lie in his eyes. A soft one. The kind you tell yourself to keep from wanting too much. That evening, when the sun dipped low and the fields glowed with the warmth of things not yet grown, Miriam walked out to the edge of the garden alone. The ground was firm now. Seeds had taken. Tiny shoots pushed up from the soil. She sank to her knees and ran her hand over the dirt, feeling the life beneath. Felt it like a promise. Behind her she heard his boots in the grass. "I never asked," she said softly, "why you're still here." Eli stood with his hands in his pockets, watching the light shift. "My wife," he said after a long pause. "She was always waiting for a better life to start. After the barn got fixed. After the rains came. After we had a child. After." He looked down at the rose. "Then one day she was gone, and the life she was waiting for never showed." Miriam turned to him. "I ain't waitin'," she said. He nodded once. The wind caught the edge of his coat. "Good." She rose slowly. They stood there in silence, the earth between them tilled and ready. The sky stretched wide above, endless and unafraid. Inside the house the children laughed. Lita squealed and Alma hushed her, but not too hard. Miriam looked toward the sound, then back to Eli. "We'll need more seed," she said. He smiled just barely. "We will." And that was how it began, not with a kiss or a vow, but with dirt under their nails and shared breath in the stillness. A house, a field, a fire that never went out. Subscribe and follow where endurance is earned.